to give you some calculator help for graphing functions, but particularly trig functions right now. So if you are on your scratch pad and you click that button again, that will get you to your graphing window. I want you to notice that right now your graphing window goes from -10 to 10 and about -7 to 7 in the Y direction. If you push menu and go to window zoom, this is known as zoom standard. So whenever you, and I guess it's -6 to 6, if you ever need to get back to this window, just go menu, zoom, window, zoom standard, and that gets back to what we call kind of your basic graphing window. Now I need to have you change some settings for us to graph in or do our trig graphs, particularly in degrees. Right now you'll notice if you hover over the graphing icon that you are in radians. Maybe on the older version you may not see radians, and we need to actually go in and change a particular setting. When you're in the graphing menu, push menu, go to settings, and notice there's a graphing angle and a geometry angle. You want to change your graphing angle to degrees for right now. We will be using radians later, but right now change it to degrees and make default. So you can tab down until you get to, there's a whole lot of things there, make default. Okay. Okay. Now secondly, I want to see a trig graph which goes from 0 to 360 degrees on the x-axis. So this is not big enough, 10. There's a special zoom for trig. So if you go to zoom again, you can see zoom trig, number 8. Notice how it goes from positive 360 to negative 360 and from 0 to 4. This is really nice to display most trig graphs. If you want to see sine and cosine a little bit more clearly, you may want to change these numbers to be a little smaller. You can do that two ways. You can go to window zoom and window settings and you see X min, X max. So that's your lowest and highest X values that are displayed on the window. Your X scale auto just tells you how often you see a tick mark. If there's a certain number of tick marks you want to see, you can change that to any number you want, or you can leave it at auto. Y min and Y max, you can change those or leave them. Another way you can change it is to take your arrow and just hover over to that number so it says text and click twice on your click pad, and then you can just change it. So if I wanted to change it to 2, for example, then if I tab, use my tab key, it goes over to here. I want to leave that one alone. Then if I push tab twice, it goes down to here, and I can change that to -2, and then I want to leave that one alone. Okay, so I'm done. Push escape to finish. So notice now it's going, each tick mark represents 0.2 here, each tick mark represents 20. Actually, I would rather have my tick marks represent 30 degrees, so I'm going to change menu, window, zoom, window settings, and I'm going to change my X scale to 30 instead of 20. Okay, so now it's every 30 degrees. That's more like what we've been using in class. Another thing you can do, if you go to menu, view, show grid and line grid. And this is kind of nice because it really gives you a better feel sometimes. Sometimes you don't want the grid, it looks too busy, but sometimes when you're first looking at a graph, it gives you a better feel for where the points are. So all of these are different settings that you can change. Also, I want you to notice that you can do Control Escape to undo anything you've done. So if you've done something and that wasn't what you meant to do, Control Escape is an undo button for your calculator. I am going to go back and put the line grid back on because I do want to see that. But just to show you that you can undo things, that's helpful to know. Now I want to graph something. If you push the tab button, it opens up the little menu. And you can also get that if you go to menu and show graph entry edit, and then pick function in this case. And once again, if you opened a dialog box or a drop down menu and you want to get out of it, push escape and it closes those windows. So I want to type in sine of x. So trig sine of x. Now notice I'm not putting in sine of theta because this says f of x equals. F of x, remember, is another way of saying y. Y equals sine of x. So it's saying my input here is x rather than theta. Now I use theta to indicate an angle when I'm writing, but on your calculator the input value in function mode is always x. Push enter, and there is my sine graph. If you want to, you can hover where it says label, hold down to your click pad until the hand closes, which I just didn't do very well here. Let me try that again. So the hand, my hand closed, there you go. Then you can drag that wherever you want to, and then you push escape to release the hand. Okay. The other thing you can do is if you, let's see, if you hit the label, I think if you do control click, I'm not sure how it works on yours, if you just click on it, I think if you go to menu, you can say view, hide object selection, guys. Never mind. I'm not sure about this. I can do this easily on my calculator, but don't worry about it. You can hide this, but I have to remember how to do it, but it's not important right now. Okay, the next thing I want to do is show you how to trace. So you go to menu and you go to trace and graph trace. You will see that there's a cursor on your graph and you'll see it coordinates. So this is what the coordinates of this point. If you use your right arrow key, you can move the cursor and you can see the number of degrees is your x value and the trig value is your y value. Now I don't particularly like the way it's tracing because it's not terribly helpful to me the way it's tracing. It's giving me some unusual, it's not giving my special angles that I'd really like to see. My special angles are always multiples of 15 or 30. So I am going to go back to 0. So let me go back down to 0. And then I'm going to go to menu and I'm going to go to trace and I'm going to go to trace step. And I want to change it to 15. So this means every time I click my arrow, it's going to go 15 degrees. So right arrow 15, 0.259, 30, there we go. Sine of 30 is 1/2, that looks familiar. Sine of 45 is 0.7, that looks familiar. Sine of 60 is 0.87, that looks familiar. Okay, sine of 90 is 1. So these are some of the numbers that we were working with before. So this will look more familiar. These are the special numbers that we were using. Notice your calculator is really nice when you get down to 0. It says this is a 0. This is where it crosses the x-axis. It's also going to tell you your maximum, and well, it often tells you your maximum minimum. It's not doing that here. So you can trace along and use this to help plot points. Now I want you to see if you go off the graph, like if I keep going to the right, it will shift the graph over. And I'm thinking, oh, I don't like that. I want it back to the way it looks. I think if you do control escape right now, let's just do escape. Okay, I'm out of my graphing, I'm out of my trace. Just pushing escape takes me out of the trace. Then if I do control escape, nope. I guess I'm going to have to redo my graphing window. So sometimes if your graphing window shifts, you can do control and undo and it'll shift it back. We're going to want to shift my graph back to where it was. Window zoom, zoom trig, change this to 2, change this to -2, push escape. I want my trace step to be 15 again. There we go. Now it's back to the way it was before, I think. Nope, it didn't. Oh, that's my trace step. I wanted to go to my window settings. I wanted my X scale to be 30 because I like that better. Oops. 30. Okay, so sometimes when you go off the screen you have to redo some things. I'm ready to do cosine anyway. So I can do my cosine graph. If I push tab and I can type in my cosine of x and then I can see my cosine graph. Okay, remember you can trace that, menu, trace, graph trace. I think I'm still set for 15 degrees. Yep, I'm set for 15 degrees so I can trace my graph. So when I tell you certain window settings, the reason I'm telling you to use them is I know that when I trace things, the graph tends to shift position. So when something you can do to help that, you're going to be looking at some graphs of, for example, tangent. Let's change this to tangent. So if you go push tab, that takes you to a second graph. But rather than adding tangent on top of cosine, if I up arrow, that takes me back to my previous graph, and I'm going to edit that and make this tangent instead. So let's make this tangent of x. Now, if I trace this, what's going to happen, trace, graph trace, is as soon as I trace and go up here, it's going to start shifting the graph and making it look really weird. I'm going to try Control Escape and see if this will take me back to where I was. We'll see. Nope, it didn't help. So once again, take my menu, go to Zoom. I'm just going to leave it on Zoom Trig right now. That'll be fine. Put my tangent graph back on, and I'm going to show you another way to trace that might be useful. I'm thinking, what are the important angles I want to see? I want to see 0. I want to see 45, 30, 45, 60, 90, those sort of things. So if I go to Menu and Trace, one nice thing when you're in the Trace menu is you can type in any x value and it will just automatically jump to that point and give you the y value. So if I just type in 30 degrees, it'll automatically give me, there's the 30.6. Remember, there was one of the points we plotted. I can type in 45 and it'll get me to 190. Look at that. It puts in the asymptote for you and tells undefined. So there is your 90 degree undefined. Now I want to go to, after 90, 120. So I'll type in 120, enter. Now notice I can then put in all the values that I want and the graph is not jumping around. So that's the advantage to not actually using your arrow keys when you trace. The graph doesn't jump around on you, but you can still find all the values that you want to find. If you want to remember what some of those values, a nice thing that you can do too is, I think if you're on that point and you push enter, it will plot the coordinates. So then the next point I go to, so let's say I go to 135 next, notice the 120 stays on there, and I can push enter and I can label all these points, and then when I escape out of trace mode, the points are still labeled where they were. You know, and this is kind of in the way. I'm going to drag it. Oops. If I get this label, sort of drag it out of the way, there's my tangent. So I can actually label the points and leave them on there, which is really handy if I'm trying to plot something and I want to refer back to those. So those are some tips for graphing. We'll be doing more with graphing, but that'll help you to get started on how to use your calculator graphing features more effectively.